So we were just talking about how much we preferred the other 5 or 6 titles that we suggested for this workshop. And a little bit of what all of us heard this morning from Jennifer as far as that whole history and what's the one thing that comes, that word that kept coming up, law, 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 and how it's always changing. And you know, we know that that's unique to us and don't really want to bore other people with that. But we would do find that there's a lot of value in the programs that we've had. You know, a lot of the talk that you're hearing from schools is that they're site-based schools that are going to hybrid. And Kathleen and I, anyway, we have schools that started as homeschools that moved to hybrid. And when the Charter Schools Act came in 1992, it was all about giving healthy competition to the districts. It was about giving local control to the teachers and the parents. And you know, so you just had the word charter school. Well, then the non-classroom based charter schools came around. But they didn't know what to call them because there's only 2 categories in California, and it wasn't seat-based, so they called them independent study. And then independent study wasn't working because there were some of the laws that they said, well, no, these don't pertain to charter schools that are independent study. So now we're going to put them in another category called non-classroom based, which again, you've already heard, that's a misnomer because we do have classrooms. And so the term hybrid is not a formal term, but it's something that we use among ourselves. Or if you saw any of our shirts last night, classroom optional schools. So Element Schools, unlike these 2 ladies with me, our organization is much smaller. We have 2 charter schools. Element Education is the overriding umbrella. We have Community Montessori, which is a K-8 Montessori. For the most part, it's a 4-day-a-week program. Students still have the flexibility to maybe come just in the morning for the morning work period and then go home at the end of the day if being in a site is too much for them. We also have some that actually do their core work at home and just come in the afternoon when there's more of the active work going on. And then the other school is Dimensions Collaborative. That's a K-12 personalized learning school. And it has a huge range of curriculum. And students that come anywhere from 0 to 1 hour or like 90 minutes a week for a lab to 4 days a week for various classes. And we have a little video. Before we do this, I will say the commonality between the schools, and we heard this morning too, right? You need to be able to know who you are. And we do have shared core values around self-determined learning. That idea that the family is the hub and that we're here to support families. The community need, we have small learning centers, so even though both of our schools are countywide benefit, the learning centers are fitting that need. And it's not just that district. All of our learning centers feed or have students that are like 5 or 6 different districts. So people do drive by their district schools to bring them to our learning centers. And then they have a different...
They drive an hour.
Right, yeah. Sometimes there's, then for us there's a different approach. Montessori is Montessori. It's all about the materials, and there's a philosophy there. Whereas Dimensions follows something a little different. We have a rubric for self-determined learning. The early stages being that dependent learner, and we're instilling those foundational skills. Then like upper elementary is the personalized learning, middle school being self-directed, with the idea that by high school they're self-determined. We all know that there are many high school students that are still in that dependent learner stage, and as such we work with them going through those phases. But here's a little bit about Dimensions.
Here at Dimensions, our students are matched with a California credentialed teacher, whom we call an educational facilitator, or EF, to design a unique learning plan.
We, as educational facilitators, get to actually work with each individual student and find out who they are as a person, the ways that they learn, the modalities and talents and interests and even just preferences. We get to take all that information into consideration when we create suggested pathways that suit who they are as an individual learner.
That helps our students become resilient and actually understand that sometimes things aren't going to work out the way they expected. And in the future, we have job markets that we don't even know have been created yet. These students are going to be ready to guide themselves into the direction that they need to go.
Our learning centers are located throughout San Diego County and provide creative spaces, tech labs, hands-on learning, Socratic discussions, and specialized instruction. Students have the option to attend these centers for as much as 4 days per week, depending on their interests and needs.
This is kind of a combination of independent study, collaboration, and social time, critical, creative thinking, as well as get help on core subjects.
We have a lot of students who need a lot of time to pursue their own endeavors. And they can thrive in this school because they can do the work on their own schedule and develop the traits to manage their own time.
We support learners by collaborating with families to design a dynamic educational plan within a nurturing learning community. We provide an array of personalized resources to help them take ownership of their educational journey and ultimately be equipped for the challenges of the 21st century. Our K-12 program includes a dedicated educational facilitator who partners with parents and students to develop and implement a dynamic, personalized learning plan, and a full-time academic counselor who works closely with students and families to map their transition from high school to college. Our centers are staffed by these educational facilitators, along with industry experts from our learning community and dedicated support professionals. We work closely with local colleges and organizations.
She's able to take college courses at our local community college, which are much more advanced than what she was even getting at her private school, and that's allowing her to really kind of expand herself intellectually. And it's actually even changed what she wants to study when she gets to school.
We regularly schedule outside speakers to give our students a broad network of educational paths, professional perspectives, and advancement opportunities.
So to have an outside voice to come in and lead them in a conversation that's different than what they're normally used to, it's only going to help them see the world differently and see themselves differently and participate in the world in a more meaningful, effective way.
So your myth busters here today, we have quite a few myths we want to bust. And one is that hybrid learning needs a lot of structure to be effective. It's not uncommon for us adults to feel like I'm going to give you more freedom, but I can only do that if I give you more structure, which doesn't make sense, but that's a comfort level for a lot of people. And we believe that authentic learning requires a student plan, not a lesson plan. And so as you heard in there, we have 1,300 students. That means there's 1,300 learning plans that we're managing. And this whole list here are all the things that we take into consideration when we're writing their plan, including their current circumstances, their access to resources, and personal accountability. Where are they on that? Back to that whole learner thing. Are they that dependent learner that it's everybody else's job to make sure that I learn, or are they, where are they as far as being able to get their mind around the fact that their learning is their responsibility? And we just believe that the job of the teacher is not to know the right answers, but to ask the right questions and provide the right tools. Myth number 2, hybrid learning can't be done in large schools. Well, if you read your history about education, that one schoolhouse really was what today they're calling this fancy term mastery-based or content-based learning. Well, that's how it all started in that one room schoolhouse. Was students had things they had to learn, and they were able to learn at their own pace, and they checked in with the teacher and got their things checked off. And if you have not heard of the Learning Council, it's COUNSEL, not CIL. I highly recommend that you look them up and become a member. They have excellent resources for hybrid learning. Let's what they're all about. But this is their graphic. Not quite what our learning centers look like, but same idea. So when you come in, you're not coming in for classes, you're coming in for access to a specialist or tools or peers for collaboration. And so we have designated space. Here's your quiet, independent study area. And that's all you do there, is be quiet and study independently. Then we have a bigger area for collaboration. Kids can sit in smaller groups and work together. There's another designated space for direct instruction. When you have a group of kids that all need to have a lesson on an introductory paragraph or how to chart a slope and some things like that. And so even schools, big schools, can make small learning spaces. Hybrid learning requires standardized assessment. And this was touched on earlier this morning too. There's no reason in today's time, we're not back in those factory days, right? It's okay to allow the artist to do sketches, to allow the performer to do an oral presentation, to let that people person do small group collaboration. They don't all have to take the multiple choice test and know the exact same thing. In today's, you want them to be able to demonstrate their learning in different ways because that's how they're going to apply it in the real world.
Okay, I'm Kathleen, and this is, thank you. This is our school. Those are the counties we cover in Southern California. And I think like when the earlier speaker was talking about like knowing your purpose and everything, and a lot of the purpose that they were talking about is more spiritual purpose and all that, which of course as public schools, we're all three of us public schools, we do have a spiritual purpose, but our spiritual purpose is sort of, in our school, is unfolding the child, the person that's within that child, right? So at the core of each person, each child is a person first. So we don't call them scholars or any of that stuff, we call them children and people. And so we want to nurture that innate curiosity. Children are born with that innate curiosity. You don't have to teach them to play, you don't have to teach them to explore their environment or to speak. But when you get to school, there's an inverse, like a perfect inverse correlation to engagement every year they're in school. Every year in school they're less engaged. They start out engaged in kinder and then they just dwindle. And we beat that, our traditional system beats that joy of learning out of our children. It's not like on purpose. Teachers love the kids, teachers want the kids to be excited about learning, and there are moments of excitement, but you sat through lectures and lessons that you were not at all interested in, day after day in school. Plus also, the typical school is so rigid and structured, the average high school student has less freedom in their high school, regular comprehensive high school, than a prisoner in prison. The studies have been done on this. So we make them walk a certain way, sit in their seat, they're not allowed to get out of their seat without permission, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, at Springs, we want the children to make their own decisions. We do student-led learning, and so part of that is they have to have freedom in their space. They have to make decisions about where they sit. They have to, all of these things. And of course, some kids need a little support. Not all kids can do it right off the bat. Like, it's a gradual release of responsibility, like we do with teaching, right? So anyway, so for us, it's that innate curiosity. We want to keep that joy every year by letting them study things that they're really interested in and not doing that an inch deep and a mile wide, going in depth on the things that are interesting to them. So not everybody's course in history is going to be the same as everybody else's, because some kids are going to be very interested about battle, battle strategy, and other kids are going to be interested in the textiles and the clothes of the time or whatever. But all of it is surrounding the whole picture of the time period, and you can weave the standards in to any of those content areas. All right, then you can go to the next.
Sorry, I've got your presentation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so myth 4. Okay, so we have 23 locations. We have 6 charters, but 23 locations. And many of our locations are in low-income areas, and we have very, very good results with our low-income students. So sometimes people say, well, hybrid education, homeschooling education is only for the rich kids, for the middle-class kids, where they can afford to have one parent home. This particular child, before I'm going to show a minute and a half of this video, and this child is one of our hybrid students. He goes to school 3 days a week. He scored perfect score, both English and math, on his standardized test the year before we made this video. And his parents do not speak English very well, and they are illegal immigrants. So this is a family that has sacrificed in order to spend this time with their kids. So.
I'm Elias Hernandez. I'm a student at River Springs Charter School, and I'm in 6th grade right now. I'm in the Mosaic program, which means I go to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I have homework to do with my mom or by myself on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I usually pitch in and help my mom, and I just help my brothers with their homework or whatever they need. So my parents immigrated from Mexico to USA. I really do think that my parents have made a lot of sacrifices. My parents don't speak that great English, but they've been trying over the years and they've gotten really good. I'm really grateful because my parents have put a lot of effort into giving me and my brothers a great education and a great life. I really love my mom because she helps us with everything we have. Since we haven't homeschool, we get to spend time with her. We get to be here with her during Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she can help us instead of us just doing it on our own.
Decidimos homeschool mi esposo y yo porque miramos que era una buena opción para nuestra familia, ya que yo me gusta tener a mis hijos conmigo en casa y tener una educación diferente, más personalizada con nuestros hijos, más directa con ellos. Nuestra escuela está muy cerca de nuestra casa, había escuchado acerca de la escuela, pero yo pensaba que era una escuela privada, pero me dijeron que era una escuela pública. Entonces dije, oh, qué buena opción para nosotros. Decidí ir a informarme acerca de las aplicaciones y lo hicimos. Y me informaron acerca de los programas que estaban manejando y dije, wow, es una muy buena opción para nuestra familia.
Mastery. So our whole entire program most traditional schools, their programs revolve around a textbook, generally speaking, pacing guide, adherence to using a textbook series with fidelity. That's their big thing. For us, we want, we're faithful to the child and the mastery of the standards. So when I was in college and university getting my doctorate, I had a statistics class, graduate level statistics class, and that professor blew my mind because at the time I'd been in education for several years, and I decided to go back and get my doctorate. And he blew my mind because he said, okay, we're covering these 10 topics or whatever it was in statistics, and he's like, so you just need to buy a textbook that covers those topics. Any textbook will do. You can go to the used bookstore, you can get a textbook from 1958, doesn't matter. I'm like, what are you talking about? How is that even possible? Well, I can't imagine any history teacher in the world ever saying that. Like, pick any history book, because it wouldn't be, So we're just so textbook focused in education in general, but we aren't. So Springs, we believe in the standards, and a child might need 3 or 4 practice assignments to master a standard. They might need 30. For us, so for those skills that are incremental, and they build on each other, we do this process, which is called our mastery learning wheel. The child knows what skill they're working on. The child has a mastery path. The mastery path is, there are multiple options, like 10 to 15 options for each standard, and they have, some of them are online options, some of them are paper and pencil, some of them are textbook, but from a variety of textbooks you might have in your class, like you have one of each of the different types of textbooks, and some of them are pair partner activities. So they would initially select 2 or 3 or 4 according to the standard, and then they would do those, then they would try and see how much they're getting it, and then they'd have a conference, a tuning conference with their teacher, and then they say, okay, well, you're going to need to pick a couple more because you're not ready to prove that you mastered it. So we do not do whole group instruction for these incremental things that require stepped learning, which is a lot of reading skills, English language arts skills, and math skills. When it comes to science and history, we do whole group instruction, like, because everybody can participate in this, in a cool conversation about some history thing that they want to learn. I'm not a history teacher, so obviously I didn't have a good example there, but when it comes to reading and math, a lot of kids, if you do whole group instruction, a lot of kids are sitting there, they're not in their zone of proximal development. It's too hard, too easy, so 50% of the class is just out to lunch during your lecture. So you're wasting a lot of time. So we don't waste that time. There's a lot of work time for the children. They can work in their zone of proximal development for their reading and for their math. So, all right, move to the next one. And then, okay, so this is the thing that was so shocking to me. I thought when the pandemic happened, we, as Jennifer said in her school, we turned it around. We were told we couldn't go back to school on like a Thursday, and by Monday, all the kids were in school because we already had learning management system, we used Canvas, we had everything available. But we were told we couldn't take any more students. We had a glut of students coming in because a lot of our districts in California, the regular districts, would not provide education because they were still trying to figure it out. They were still trying to figure out with their unions how to do it and all that kind of stuff. So parents were saying, hey, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. So we actually did a K through 12th grade free 6 weeks plan for every, we just opened up our curriculum. It's actually a light version of our curriculum, but like what parents could do without a teacher. And then we offered Zoom classes for those grade levels once a day, like an hour a day or 40 minutes a day of a Zoom class. So and we opened it to the whole world. We had 7,000, or over 7,000 people accessing that. All over the world, including Australia and other countries. So anyway, that was kind of fun. So that was something that we were really glad we were able to do because we couldn't enroll these students. We were frozen on enrollment. So for us, the thing is that the reason that the pandemic distance learning was allegedly a failure is because they tried to recreate the classroom on Zoom. They tried to have the teachers, because they didn't trust the teachers, they don't trust the students. That's when it boils right down. They don't trust the students to learn, because they think the students have to be forced to learn. And then also they don't trust the teachers to teach, because they think that teachers have to be forced to keep to the pacing guide and teach the curriculum with fidelity. And all of that adds up to a bad distance learning experience. So for us, these are the 4 things that worked for us. The one-on-one conferences, having a weekly one-on-one conference teacher and student was absolutely, our kids did not have that learning loss. Small group lessons work on Zoom. Whole group lessons do not work on Zoom. You can do a whole group activity that's fun and the kid engaging, like a community building, that's like 10, 15 minutes to get everybody together and say, hey, what are you going to work on? Set a goal, for today and whatever. But not this whole idea of being in 6 hours a day of 30 children in a class, Zoom. Horrible, horrible idea. So anyway, and then computer-based. Okay, so I got my master's degree in computer-based education in 1988, before the internet, or before I knew about the internet. I mean, I'm sure professors somewhere were using something like that, but there was no internet. It was all like games, computer-aided instruction, and everybody thought that the computers were going to take over education. There's no way it's going to take over education. It has to be led by a teacher. So these are the things that we use that are technological, that work, if a teacher is directing it. So you can't let iReady instruction run you can't say, oh, the kids did such and such minutes of iReady, and you think that that's because it just gives them the next lesson, blah, blah, blah. The teacher has to manage that. The teacher has to check in on that. The teacher has to push the child into the learning that they have presented. So it can't be just run by the computer. And that's what sometimes happens, that teachers just don't want it. They just think of, teachers don't want to deal with it, and the districts or schools do not say, that's not acceptable. So for us, personalized learning is 1/3 computer, but run by the teacher and managed by the teacher and checked in on in their tuning meetings, and 2/3 paper and pencil. So it works that way because the computer is just patient, and the kid can try and like they can get it wrong multiple times and the computer will correct them. So for many things the computer is good, but it just, the way teachers and schools want to use it does not work. So anyway, we like, by the way, one thing to note, one of the things that we do is, for example, our students on home study days, we might ask them to read a chapter of a book, let's say. So how do you know that they read the chapter of the book? Pretty much, a lot of them didn't when they come back to school and you try to do an activity. So Canvas has this ability for the child to actually read into a recorder thing. It's just right in, it's integrated, it's easy to use. So they could read the chapter aloud. So it might take 10, 15 minutes or whatever more for them to read the chapter, and it uploads, and the teacher sees, oh, here's 30 kids in the class, 24 of them read the chapter. This is not the way universities use it. Of course, universities don't care about that. We do. We care that they read the chapter. They've got to have that reading volume. We know how highly aligned that is to reading level. And so all the teacher has to do is just go to the middle of that audio file and click and listen to a little bit of it. Is the kid really reading the chapter? Is it the kid's voice? Is it just something that they've looped and uploaded? You know what I mean? So the good use of technology can really make the hybrid homeschool, the home study days robust and accountable. So anyway, I'm a big fan of IT, of course. I'm a big fan of technology, but it's like it has to be managed. You cannot, nothing runs itself. Nothing. Teacher is absolutely vital to everything. All right, and that's the end of mine. Okay. And then we'll have Q&A.
It is more comfortable to stand back there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have an overview slide for Untitled schools, so let me just tell you real quickly. We have 9 schools across 4 states. We work with Maker Learning Network, which that is Amber Ruskin, she's right there, and together we started this whole journey with one little school in California. Our first year, so if you know when I say this, but our first year we had, we started with about 100 kids, ended with maybe about 120. Year 2, we had 450. We had to move, and it was craziness because it took a lot of teaching, training families that we are something different, we are something weird. If you're not weird, if you don't want this, there's fabulous schools all the way around us, because there really are. Most of them stayed. In fact, we've grown, as you can see, from the many schools.
Partly because we're free. I mean, one thing to note, and this is why you guys, sorry, I hate to break it, but
good job.
I am, all right. But I was going to say, I don't understand why you guys in other states aren't fighting for tax dollars to be used for hybrid education, because why should parents have to pay out of pocket? I mean, yes, for Christian education, yes, but for a hybrid option, they shouldn't have to pay out of pocket. That's just not right. Anyway, go ahead.
And I'll piggyback on it just real quick.
Okay.
And kids from poverty deserve this.
They deserve it.
So that's one of the reasons that we continue to expand into many different kinds of communities. I would say we started with seat-based schools, classroom schools. There's nothing traditional about them, but they are like classroom seat-based schools. we saw pretty quickly, because Amber had homeschooled for a while, that there was a need for hybrid education. And so we actually, in 2014, got one of our schools in California approved as IB hybrid. And its whole intent was to begin to roll that forward. And when we would tell people, like authorizers or other people that ran schools, oh, we have IB hybrid, they'd say, oh, so your computer and your seat. And we're like, yeah, no, that's not what hybrid means. And so it gave us that opportunity to educate them. All of our schools fall under the umbrella of project-based learning, which is deeper learning, and social-emotional learning. And our mission is free to think, inspired to lead. It's very simple, but if you really think about it, it is pretty deep. It's important to us that we don't teach kids what to think, but how to think. So because of that, we use a different language, not like French or anything. I'm not smart enough for that. But we don't have teachers, we have facilitators, because it's important that they understand that they're not opening heads and pouring in information and pouring in standards, that they're facilitating learning and teaching the learners, because they're not students to us, how to access learning. We do use the standards as a guide, as kind of in the background, and our facilitators have to get really good at knowing what those are, how they fit into each of the projects, and ensuring that the learners are getting that content. So it's pretty complicated, but it's doable and it's beautiful when it rolls out. Social emotional learning has always been important to us. When we first got approved in 2008 was our first school, and we told the authorizers that we were, that social emotional learning was even as important as academic, they looked at us with cross-eyed. And we learned really quickly that we couldn't outright give them, talk to them about social emotional learning, because they were like, oh, that's just that touchy-feely stuff.
Now everybody's
fast forward. Yeah, don't take my line.
Oh, sorry.
So fast forward to now, everyone's talking about social emotional learning. It's a bit more watered down than us because it's baked into the fabric of what we do. And project-based learning is one of those vehicles where learners have to work together. They have to talk. They have to communicate. They have to plan together. And that is where social emotional skills come. And lots of times, our facilitators, especially new ones, will say, it is a mess in here. It is crazy because these kids are all arguing with each other. We're like, that's your teachable moment. Walk around, talk with them, help them understand how to do that, because when our kids graduate and they go into the workplace, they're not going to be those 40, 45-year-olds. They're fighting with each other and quitting jobs and getting fired because they can't get along. So that was really important for us on the onset. So going back to our Mythbusters, our myth number 8. Hybrid teachers don't work as hard as traditional teachers. Now, in our program, we have iLead Online, we have our hybrid programs, and we have our seat-based programs. And even within our own organization, I've had people who are in the seat-based schools who say, well, they're not here every day. They're not doing the same level of work that we are. And I have to educate our own internal people on the fact that even on those days that they might be working from home and developing curriculum, their day doesn't stop. And people, we lived through the pandemic, everybody knows that now. If you're working from home, you're working, and sometimes you look up and you're like, oh, I forgot to feed my kids and it's 9 o'clock.
How's your data? How's your data? Sorry. Okay, go ahead. I just wondered.
We have a Q&A right now.
All right. I just thought you might know.
Okay. So our instruction looks very different, and we don't have canned instruction. Even our iLead Online program is created by our facilitators, and it focuses on project-based learning. And we make sure that we include field studies, and that is connected with the learning that they're doing, and their families come, and it's a really great community event that they can participate in. Our parents are always partners. They're not someone who even comes into a learning center and just puts up bulletin boards. They're working with small groups of learners. They're making sure that we're really connecting with the kids. And many of our hybrid programs use skilled, embedded vendors. So we don't just say, oh yeah, you can go to whoever vendor. It needs to be a vendor that we have vetted, that we have talked to, that we know, and that they are aligned in doing what we want for our kids. Myth number 9, hybrid curriculum is not rigorous, it's only simple busy work. And by the way, to get my myths, I Googled myths about hybrid learning just in case you want them. And what that means is people will say, oh, you have to stick them on front of a computer and then they're going to be in the classroom and they're just doing little packets, things like that, things that we kind of saw sprout up in the pandemic when people didn't know what else to do. And we say that our learning is engaging and passion-driven. It's personalized. It's really important for us. Our kids have individualized learning plans that they have and they utilize and they check in with every single year. They create those with their facilitators. It's smaller groups. We always are telling them the world is your classroom because that's what project-based learning does. It takes it out of books, out of the classroom, and out into the community, into the world, so that our learners know that they can make a difference starting in kindergarten. Like, we've had kindergartners whose projects have been like drives for homeless dogs, or bringing in food, and they have really made a difference, and they know that they can make a difference in the world, and that's important. Tutoring is always available when on the off days that they're not able to, that they're not coming into the learning center. And to talk a little bit about rigor, some of the things that our kids do, whether they're seat-based or they're in hybrid or online, is we have a program called Dream Up, and that is where our learners participate in a really rigorous project with people from NASA and other science institutions that help them create projects, experiments, microgravity experiments that will go up to the International Space Station. So it is really, really rigorous, and that is a competitive process within our organization, that if the learners want their experiment to go up, they have to present it in front of the scientists. Then the scientists deselect some of the projects, and they take a deeper look at it, they interview the learners, and then we make sure that they can go up onto the International Space Station. Our little ones, they get ready for this project because we have a patch competition, so they get to artistically design a patch, which really becomes the real patch for that year that we can put on our patch jackets. We've also, all of our 8th graders, we have legacy projects. Our 8th graders do a lot on flight. Keith, who's in the back of the room, to create and design our glider project, which our 8th graders do, where they learn about the principles of flight, they study it in the classroom, and then the assessment, talking about assessments don't always have to be standardized. The assessment is really when they go up in the glider, and the glider pilot is sitting right behind them, and I only know this because I held on and did it one time, and they ask them questions. Talk to me about the altitude. What do we need to do if we need this velocity, or I don't even know the terms, but Keith can probably do. And so it's very cool, and it's super rigorous, and it's real life. And myth 10, all students, I used your language to help you out, but all learners learn better in person. And what we do is we cater to all of the learning styles that at ILEAD schools that the learners need. So there's a lot of voice and choice, and we're also really big about what their passion is. So there might be a project on like the Roaring 20s, like in high school, and like Amber's daughter, she had a passion project at that point that was fashion and wanted to know about fashion, so she designed the clothing that they would wear when they did their big POL, which is a presentation of learning. So she did a historical reconfiguration of those costumes, and now she's YouTube famous. No, TikTok famous. And she does, is it the 50s or just different? She dresses up.
All different periods, but it's vintage.
Vintage is her thing. And it's a vintage lark if you want to see her. She's beautiful, and it's fun, and she followed that passion. So she went to college, and now she's doing this, and she's making money and making herself successful just based on being able to follow her passion, as well as learn the standards enough to be able to go to college and graduate. So also, all of our schools really are attractive to neurodiverse learners. And Mandy, who presented earlier, talked about how we meet the needs of those learners, and I think our families see that their children can be successful in a hybrid model because they have the opportunity to be on their own and work on their own and do their own things, but then come and have some practice people time. And if that's too much, you can adjust the amount of people time. And sometimes they grow into needing more and more people time, which is, kind of nice. And they also have a lot of autonomy, and they can follow their passion. So, our neurodiverse learners really get hyper-focused on particular things. So you just have to use that to be able to kind of pull it into the project. It's really wonderful. And as we found out, our workplace has shifted drastically since the pandemic. People like to be able to work from home, a lot of people. People like that option of sometimes working in the office and sometimes working from home. And so ultimately what all of us that are running hybrid schools are doing is preparing our kids for the workplace that's not tomorrow, but the workplace that is now. So now we just need to get the rest of the world to kind of catch up to us. And like Kathleen said, we need to get state departments of education to understand the value of hybrid so that our learners who are in lower socioeconomic populations can also have this for free. Because I hear that, when you do private, but they have to pay. And we're just trying to spread the wealth all over.
Hybrid is the model of the future.
Absolutely.
There is no reason in this day and age that kids have to be in school 7 hours a day, 5 days a week.
So we're going to, as I told you, we're weird. So the footage that you're going to see on our little promo video is all taken from all of our learning centers and seat-based schools. So let's just give you an idea of how things are pretty different for us.
Who said your education had to start in college? That school couldn't be a place your kids wanted to come to every day. Where learning wasn't just about the test. Where art and imagination were encouraged. Technology was embraced. Where you didn't just learn history from a textbook. Where your kids were encouraged to find their own voice, to try it differently. A place that wasn't about what you got wrong, but for trying to get it right. Invested in finding that one special thing that makes you, you. At iLead Schools, we don't just encourage students to dream, but to dream big. There's a leader in every child. Let us help you find yours. Free to think, inspired to lead.
So thank you. We want to open it up to questions. Kathleen, you have a question?
I was going to say, since you don't know your data, but I didn't know my data. But no, our data for our hybrid kids is better than our data for our private kids. That's the weird.
It's a myth.
That's a myth. It's a myth that the kids need 5 days a week. When the parents are invested, the parents support that, that robust education. They do not need to be in front of a credentialed teacher 5 days a week. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, and you guys all believe that. So, yes, in the back. Yeah.
I'm really inspired by this. I think I kind of represent that community. I'm from Washington, D.C. I have access, privilege, education, but I live in a community where a lot of people don't. And attendance is used as a very powerful tool to penalize parents, family, the kids, child protective services. Attendance becomes the pipeline to so many other issues. And looking at this model is really inspiring, but you say parents should advocate, and I just am curious from everyone, like, how do you bring this model to a different state? Do I have to move to California?
We would welcome you.
Yeah.
Yes, we would.
And I mean, on my own, yes, but thinking on a larger scale, and my role here is to come and learn and bring things back. How would someone pick this up and bring it into their community?
I was going to say that
Well, we
session
can
is
help
coming
you.
up.
Oh, okay, all right.
You know what, the National Charter School Conference is in DC this year.
Oh,
You might
okay.
want to go to that.
Okay.
And also we'll give you our card.
And so let me just explain Amber's, Amber and I were both Ivy California, and now she is Maker Learning Network, so she's taken the out-of-state schools, and I have the Ivy California schools. But our specialty really is scaling and replication. So she could absolutely help figure out a way, and it really does start with the laws, which is what Kathleen said.
Know your laws.
Well, Georgia allows it, for example, but Tennessee does not allow it. So it's like right now, Tennessee just, they're, 5-day-a-week regular seat-minute thing. So I feel like we charter schools that are more hybrid should get out there into these other states and start a 5-day-a-week and then start to make inroads in just kind of pushing legislature because this is a viable, legitimate model for public education. It doesn't have to be just for private education. Yeah, go ahead.
I have just a quick question. So I'm from Texas, and as we know, we're very involved with EdChoice. That's never, in Texas right now, we hear our legislators saying it's never going to happen. And we hear that every 2 years. I'm part of the
hybrid is never going to happen.
No, hybrid, charter, school choice, nothing.
No.
And so the issue that we have, and so what our department does is that our executive director lobbies on behalf of our bishops. Now I'm talking Catholics only.
Okay.
So I represent the Catholic schools in the state, which we accredit. Part of that relationship has been Catholic schools and our homeschoolers that are Catholics. They want, and our schools want, to create a relationship, but they don't want to do the 5-day, they don't want to do the 3-day. We are moving away from that, and that's why I'm here today, because it's kind of the best of both worlds for us. Now again, we're not doing charter, we're not talking charter or anything else. What we are talking about is just serving that community. And going back to your question is, how do you make that happen for those in need? Because if you've got a $4,000 tuition, you're not reaching the people that you need.
Right.
So what we did in the state is we're still going to continue to advocate and to fight for school choice. But at the state level in our office, we got tired of asking, and now we created a Catholic Education Growth Fund. What this means is now we are going to be able to open up these schools and help families just like Elias's family. And because we're tired of waiting and we want to see it happen. So my question to you is,
you're waiting for vouchers, is that what you're saying?
no, we're never going to get vouchers.
Okay.
We've just decided to take the bull by the horn,
Right.
and while they continue to advocate and fight at the state legislature about money and bottoms of the seat so we can get our money, we've decided to move forward with this fund, which is already in the millions, and so we're really happy about that. But my question to you is, as we get started and start looking at these models, what are 2 best practices you would give me to watch, just to kind of this is a wrinkle that we had to get over. It's not starting something new, it's bringing it into the quote-unquote Catholic school system, the thought of hybrid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think for me, I would say you start to work on mindsets. So like the speaker this morning said, it's about people and process. So you have to nurture your families to get them to understand the value of this and how it will work. And if they've already been in a traditional sort of educational system, you're going to need to work with them to kind of shift that mindset. And that's it is really hard to do until they start to see it in action, and then it will grow from there. So maybe you keep what you have and then you start a small little subset at the school so that it can kind of eventually overtake. Those are just some ideas that I have. I will say, just to connect this to the beautiful young woman in the back of the room, we have, in California, we fall under the independent study schools. So there's no designation that says, hybrid, or no designation that says online. It just says independent study, which means you don't have to have a butt in the seat, but you do have to take attendance through your work samples. And even then, that it's allowed, and you think, oh yes, California thinks so progressively, and they have sunshine and fires and earthquakes. Even then, when we went to an authorizer and we were talking with them to get authorization, one of the board members on record said, well, ladies, this isn't gonna work with those kids. I'm not kidding you. And I'm like, well, I hope they got that in the record.
In public session.
In public session,
Well,
yes. So there's those mindsets that you have to shift
And in Tennessee, we're petitioning in Tennessee right now, and the superintendent said, there's no charters in this particular district, it's a county district, and he's like, oh, charter schools are for ghetto children. He said, literally said this in the open board meeting. It's like, we just need to change that mindset, because there's room for all of us,
Yes.
private, public, public charter, public traditional school.
Great education is an equity issue.
It's an equity
Period.
issue.
Choice is an equity issue, and that's what needs to kind of boil up.
But in terms of your parents, getting your parents behind this, I think also helping that if you do 3 days in the classroom, let's say, and 2 days at home, providing the 2 days, dividing that work to the things that the parents are going to feel a lot more comfortable with is a good thing. Having easy, not like giving them the teacher's manual that costs $150 and has 48 activities for every day that you could pick and choose from. It's too overwhelming for the parents. They need a sort of a simplified, most of the parents will need something like, so we tended to, you know, spelling and grammar, our parents love to do that. There's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. Writing, they don't like. So the kids can write at home, but then bring it in and workshop it with the teacher in the classroom. Because parents don't know what a fourth grade writing is, and you know, and so math, like they don't like using manipulatives. They don't know how to use manipulatives. So if they just do some drill at home for math, and then they come in and do you know, these are the ways that we in our network have to support the parents that want that support.
So I'm sorry. Oh, I was just gonna ask. So it's a panel about California and the kind of potentially unique circumstances that you have there. I would be interested because we talked about, you know, Texas or other states or DC or places that are allowing these to happen. So what are there things that like policies that California has that helps you make your life easier, things you're doing?
One policy that's helpful. One.
And I was going to say, then the flip side is, are there policies that California has that are harmful, that make your lives more difficult than other states? So
everything but the one is fine.
I think we've got folks from all over the country.
It's the allowance for
So that's the thumbs up.
We've had that for 25 years. We've been allowed to do independent study in California for 25 years, and it's been good.
As a charter, and that's where each state needs to have a choice on public education in their state. They need to be able to allow independent study and
they're squeezing us.
Yeah.
So
right here.
What are those squeezes? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sort of like so I'm in Michigan, and I'm running a hybrid school and also a homeschool program at the same time, different days. But we're funded by a public school. So it's like a virtual school through a public school. One of my interests is trying to figure out if we can do some other funding, like a charter or something, because what we're finding is the public school every year is more and more and more trying to make us a replica of their student school. And it's like, I love some of the things you put on here about having collaborative time with, you know, kids could work independently, collaborative time. They're getting to the point where we had some flexibility on hours, and now it's like you have to spend this many hours a week on math, you have to spend this many hours on language arts, it has to be structured very much this way. And it's getting to the point where when they talk about knowing your vision, knowing what you want, it's frog in the boiling pot of water being taken away from us.
Absolutely.
Well, so some children need more time, and some children need less time.
Right.
It's that is not what they want to hear.
No, and so what we're really interested in is how do we get, like, very much in your your realm of, we want this to be accessible to everyone.
Yes.
I mean, I've had moms come to me in tears going, I always wanted to be part of even a homeschool group, but I never could afford it. Now it's affordable because it's covered, it's funded.
Does Michigan allow this model?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have an answer for you.
But that's what I would love to talk to somebody, if anybody knows anybody who I could talk to about.
We already
charters.
have approved charters in the state of Michigan, right, Amber?
Yeah, I was gonna give you my card.
Okay, we'll trade cards.
Y'all are on the hook for starting about 5 more schools
Yeah.
since this presentation started.
That's your job.
great.
That's your job. But we already have them approved. They're ready to go. We just haven't moved them forward because it's really hard to find the right people.
200 who have the mindset that's
Yes.
where we're here.
Well, I've got, 100 kids enrolled right now for next year.
So what location?
Farmington Hills, right outside Detroit. And then I'm associated with 5 other similar that have about the same number. So we're all just at the point where we're really frustrated with that public school model and feeling like we don't have any flexibility.
Yeah.
And about the language, just be aware that as charter schools, we know that we're public schools, so we have to call them traditional schools. So it's like changing that mindset nationally is we are public schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, friends, I think that's time.